So today we're discussing listening, and it is defined as the dynamic transactional process of receiving, recalling, rating, and responding to stimuli and or messages. It is transactional because both the sender and receiver are active agents in the process. Speakers rely on listeners to demonstrate that they are listening, and listeners rely on speakers to acknowledge that they know that they are listening. Receiving involves both the verbal and nonverbal acknowledgement of communication and ranges from mindful to mindless. A mindful acknowledgement of message reception might be if I ask the speaker a question. A mindless response is that I look in their direction. It doesn't demonstrate a lot of commitment to the conversation, but I've signaled that I at least heard them. Interruption, noise, and physical barriers can affect message reception. Recalling involves understanding a message, storing it for future encounters, and remembering it later. It can be immediate, short term, or long term. As educators, we are hoping that we can trigger long term recall in our students. Recall is flawed. Rarely do we recall messages word for word or to the exact detail. If you've ever played the kids game Whisper Down the Lane, maybe in a classroom, you know that um, when the first person hears something and they repeat it or regurgitate it on down the line, by the fifth or sixth person, that phrase or statement is totally different. So first we receive the message, then we recall and put it in context, like where else have I seen or heard this information? And then we rate that information, which is assessing the message. When we listen critically, we decide whether or not we agree with the message, and we place the message in context. Like, who is this person saying this? Are they trustworthy? Does the information seem accurate? Etc. Facts are verifiable and can be made only after direct observation, while inferences require a listener to go beyond what was observed to make judgments or assessments of what likely happened. For example, if I leave my house and the ground is wet, and I might assume that it rained, even though I didn't observe it raining. So that would be an inference I'm making, an educated guess that all the ground is wet. It looks like it rained. It's not a fact, though, because I haven't seen the rain with my own eyes. Opinions change over time and are based on beliefs or values. When individuals are responding, they provide observable feedback to a speaker. Non-verbally, they might nod their head. Verbally, they might say, "Preach on, Pastor, preach on." Or they might say, "I'm listening, I hear you, I agree." So that receivers provide both nonverbal and verbal feedback. And that feedback exists beyond the end of the conversation because it stays with the sender and receiver. The receiver might think about that information for days or weeks or months or their entire life. Empathy is an aspect of active listening identified with the attempt to experience the thoughts or beliefs of another person. When we try to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, we are empathizing with them. Active listeners are empathetic listeners generally. Non-judgmental feedback is owning your feelings rather than blaming others for your feelings. Using I messages, we talked about earlier this semester, is often better if you're being critical. For example, rather than saying you're an idiot to your partner, you might say, "I feel as if we're not on the same page today." That's owning your feeling that you're not connecting with your partner. Active listening is demonstrated by questioning, paraphrasing, empathizing, supporting with dialogue enhancers, analyzing, evaluating, advising, and silence. The most communicative or interesting of those is the silence, which gives time to clarify, but also can be imposing. So you might have noticed from a partner, um, when you're speaking, if they're listening intently and not speaking over you, you might think, wow, they're really a good listener. But at an alternate time, when they are, uh, when you're speaking to them and they are ignoring you on purpose, that silence might be harmful. So silence is a powerful communicative tool, and it can mean almost a large scope, take on a large scope of meanings. Questioning, of course, is a great active listening tool because it shows you're interested. So you're putting the information into your own words, like a paraphrase, and then asking a question. In terms of paraphrasing, you're putting the information into your own words. When you empathize, you are, of course, saying like, I've I've I know exactly what you're going through. I've experienced a similar tragedy in my life. When you're supportive, you might say, I see, I'm listening. When you analyze, you might offer various viewpoints. If your friend says to you, did you see that? Uh, that girl just got punched in the face. You might say, actually, I saw from a different angle and she didn't get punched in the face. It just looked that way. Evaluating someone else is a example of active listening, or you might say I agree or I don't agree with your information, here's why. And then advising, here's what you should do. Take a tip from me, go to community college your first 2 years. So all of those are examples of active listening that we practice in our daily lives. So a barrier to message reception then is noise, and there are semantic, physical, psychological, and physiological noises. The first, semantic, is like a language barrier. If somebody is speaking Spanish and you only speak English, you will experience semantic noise. Physical or environmental noise might be like if there's a jackhammer outside and somebody's having a conversation with you and you can't hear them. Psychological noise are like our biases. So this would be like if somebody is wearing a New York Jets shirt and you're an Eagles fan, and whatever they're saying could be genius or the coolest thing you've ever heard in your life, but you can't get over the fact that this person is your adversary of some kind. So your psychological noise is telling you to yell or call this guy an idiot, believe this guy is an idiot. So that's your psychological noise. Physiological noise might be something like pain. So if I broke my leg and I'm laying on the ground in pain and somebody is trying to teach me physics, I'm not going to be paying attention to physics because I have an overwhelming physiological need occurring. This is interesting, like in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but the physiological issues are some of our base needs. Like if we're hungry, if we are experiencing pain, um, then we can't learn. We're just not able to pay attention. Message overload occurs due to multitasking. So let's say somebody's talking to me while I'm writing a paper. You might have in the past started typing what the person was saying instead of what you were supposed to be typing. So this can be because you're multitasking, you're listening and you're typing something different at the same time. Your signals might get crossed and you start typing what you were listening to, not your own thoughts. Complexity is perceived due to the excessive details or things like unfamiliar language, lack of training, or preoccupation. So we believe things are complex when we don't have a lot of experience with it, or when something else in that time and space are more important to us. We can just get easily confused or sidetracked if we're not in the moment paying attention. A conversational narcissist gets caught up in their own thoughts and excludes the thoughts of others. You may have one in your life who talks over you, makes every story about themselves, and just isn't a great listener or is a one upper. And a listening gap is the time difference between your mental ability to interpret words and the speed at which they arrive to your brain. So a listening gap may occur to you in the morning. A lot of people say they need coffee in the morning to function. Your spouse might be speaking to you, and it takes 5 or 6 seconds for you to even realize that they have talked to you because you're tired or lethargic and you are experiencing a listening gap and thinking, I need my coffee.